The bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death, was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. It struck Europe, Asia, and North Africa during the mid-14th century, killing millions and forever altering the course of history. The pandemic wiped out a significant portion of the population, disrupted economies, weakened institutions, and had lasting cultural and social effects. This is a detailed account of its history, causes, spread, and impact. Origins and early spread. The exact origin of the Black Death has been debated for centuries. Most scholars believe that it originated in the steppes of Central Asia, likely in the region that is now Kyrgyzstan or Mongolia. Genetic studies of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the plague, suggest that the disease was endemic to these regions. The plague spread along the Silk Road, carried by merchants, armies, and refugees fleeing the Mongol conquests of the 13th century. The disease reached China in the early 1330s, where it killed millions before spreading westward. By the mid-14th century, trade routes, especially those connecting Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, facilitated the rapid spread of the plague. Key to the pandemic's transmission were the fleas that infested black rats, which thrived in the densely populated urban centers and on ships that carried goods across the Mediterranean and beyond. In 1346, the plague reached the shores of the Black Sea, where it devastated the port city of Kaffa, modern Feudossia, in Crimea. The story goes that Mongol armies besieging Kaffa catapulted plague-infected bodies over the city's walls, an early example of biological warfare. The Genoese traders who escaped the city unknowingly carried the disease with them, spreading it to Constantinople and Sicily. Europe's devastation, 1347 to 1351. The plague made its way to Europe in 1347, first arriving in Messina, Sicily, via Genoese ships. From there, the disease spread rapidly throughout Italy and across Europe, with an especially lethal toll in major cities due to crowded, unsanitary conditions. The pandemic ravaged Europe over the next 4 years, leaving destruction and death in its wake. Key regions affected: Italy. After Messina, the plague spread to Genoa and Venice, both major trading hubs. By early 1348, it had reached Florence, where contemporary chroniclers like Giovanni Boccaccio recorded the horrors of the disease in his famous work, The Decameron, France and Spain. By early 1348, the disease was rampant in Marseille, spreading north into France. It struck Paris in mid-1348, killing over 50,000 people. In Spain, Barcelona and Valencia suffered significant losses as the plague decimated towns along the Mediterranean coast. England. The Black Death arrived in England via the port of Melcombe Regis in Dorset in the summer of 1348. Within a year, it spread throughout the country, killing nearly 40 to 60% of the population, including entire villages that were abandoned due to the loss of life. London saw particularly high death tolls. Germany and Scandinavia, by 1350, the plague had reached Germany and Scandinavia, with reports from cities like Hamburg and Bergen detailing the extensive death tolls. The cold climate offered no protection from the spread. Symptoms and forms of the plague. The Black Death manifested in 3 primary forms. Bubonic plague, the most common form, characterized by painful, swollen lymph nodes or buboes in the groin, armpits, and neck. Victims also experienced fever chills, vomiting, and dark blotches on the skin caused by internal bleeding, which contributed to the name Black Death. Left untreated, it had a mortality rate of 60 to 90%. Bubonic Plague. This form affected the lungs and was transmitted through droplets expelled by coughing or sneezing. It was highly contagious and almost always fatal within a few days of infection. Septicemic plague. This was the rarest and deadliest form where the bacterium entered the bloodstream directly, leading to rapid death from sepsis. There were few visible symptoms, making it difficult to identify and contain. Estimates suggest that between 25 and 50 million people died in Europe alone between 1347 and 1351, accounting for 30 to 60% of Europe's population. The global death toll, including losses in Asia and the Middle East, might have been much higher. Cities were particularly vulnerable to the disease due to their dense populations and unsanitary living conditions. In Florence, for example, as many as 75% of the population died, while in Paris, the death toll reached approximately 50,000. London's population was reduced by over 40%. The countryside was not spared either. In some areas, entire villages were wiped out, with fields and farmlands left untended as peasant populations died off. The Black Death left profound effects on European society, many of which reshaped the continent in the centuries that followed. The significant decline in population caused severe labor shortages across Europe. This led to higher wages for workers and peasants who suddenly found themselves in higher demand. Serfdom, a key aspect of feudal society, began to erode as peasants took advantage of labor shortages to negotiate better conditions or move to other areas offering higher wages. With a reduced population, much agricultural land was left untended. Some landlords converted arable land to pasture for sheep farming, which required less labor. This shift from crop cultivation to livestock husbandry led to changes in diet and trade patterns. Although initially disrupted, long-distance trade eventually rebounded, and many surviving cities grew as people migrated from rural areas in search of work. This urbanization contributed to the slow decline of feudalism and the rise of a more market-based economy. Many people believed the plague was a divine punishment for sin. The failure of the Catholic Church to protect people or offer satisfactory explanations led to widespread disillusionment. In some areas, people turned to extreme forms of piety, such as flagellant movements where individuals whipped themselves in public penance, while others sought to blame and persecute religious minorities, particularly Jews. As fear and paranoia spread, Jews and other minority groups were scapegoated and accused of poisoning wells or spreading the disease. Violent pogroms erupted across Europe, notably in Strasbourg in 1349, where over 2,000 Jews were massacred. The Black Death had a profound impact on European art and culture. Themes of death and the afterlife became common in art, reflected in the Dance of Death motif, which depicted skeletons leading people of all social classes to their graves, symbolizing the universality of death. Writers like Boccaccio and Geoffrey Chaucer chronicled the human experiences during the plague, offering vivid descriptions of the fear and despair that accompanied it. The 14th century Black Death was not the last plague outbreak. Europe experienced recurrent waves of plague for centuries. Major outbreaks included the Great Plague of London from 1665 to 1666, which killed approximately 100,000 people, and the Italian plagues of the 17th century, which devastated cities like Naples and Milan. Despite these outbreaks, none were as catastrophic as the Black Death of the 14th century. The development of quarantine measures, improvements in public health, and the eventual understanding of the plague's transmission through fleas on rats reduced its recurrence. In the 19th century, Alexander Yersin discovered the Yersinia pestis bacterium, leading to modern scientific understanding of the disease. While plague still exists in some parts of the world, modern antibiotics and hygiene practices have significantly reduced its danger. The Black Death was more than just a pandemic. It was a turning point in European history. Its staggering death toll, coupled with its economic, social, and cultural impacts, paved the way for the collapse of the medieval world and the emergence of the Renaissance and modernity. It also reshaped humanity's understanding of disease, community, and mortality. Don't forget to click subscribe if you want more weekly updates on precise history. Thank you.